Loaded Weapon is pretty much what you get if spoof movies like Airplane and The Naked Gun do a comedic take on the Lethal Weapon movies, or be that the police action buddy genre of the late 80s and early 90s in general. Released in 1993, Loaded Weapon 1 bursts onto the big screen with its dumb, stupid humour. And no, that's not an insult, as dumb, stupid humour can be brilliant if done right, and Loaded Weapon 1 is one of those cases. A movie that's not afraid to make fun of the absurdity of action movie tropes and, well, Hollywood movie tropes in general, where Emilio Estevez and Samuel L. Jackson play Jack Colt and Wes Luger, two cops named after guns who must stop an evil serial killer called Jigsaw. No, not that one. This one played by the legendary Tim Curry, in this very funny movie which also stars Whoopi Goldberg, Charlie Sheen, Jon Lovitz, William Shatner, and many more. So prepare to see a spoof movie that's done right, as we explore the often forgotten about but deserves way more attention Loaded Weapon 1. So let's go back to the bizarre world of the early 90s and check it out. Number 10, Loaded Weapon 1 was originally going to be a movie based off a TV show. Although Loaded Weapon 1 is very much a spoof of action movies of the late 80s and early 90s as mentioned, particularly the Lethal Weapon movies and the cop buddy genre, originally Loaded Weapon 1 was going to be a movie version of a TV show called Sledgehammer, which ran from 1986 to 1988 and was a satirical police sitcom. The whole project started because the creator of Sledgehammer, Alan Spencer, approached New Line Cinema about the idea of making a movie version of the funny cop show, and New Line Cinema were interested. However, Spencer wasn't happy with the scripts that New Line Cinema were churning out, as he felt that they just weren't in line with his Sledgehammer show, so he abandoned the production. But despite Spencer's abandonment, the project still kept afloat, where it became its own thing, aka Loaded Weapon 1. And Sledgehammer itself was inspired by Dirty Harry. So really, we have Dirty Harry to thank for all of this. Number 9, The Return of National Lampoon. Contrary to popular belief, the first National Lampoon's movie wasn't Animal House, but was indeed a made-for-TV movie called Disco Beaver from Outer Space. Great title. However, after Animal House, the magazine company then released a string of other movies, such as Class Reunion, Movie Madness, and the Vacation series. In fact, Loaded Weapon 1 was the first National Lampoon's movie to be released since 1989's Christmas Vacation. However, Loaded Weapon 1 isn't actually a National Lampoon's movie, in the sense that it was created by someone who worked on the magazine or prior movies, but instead the National Lampoon's brand was brought out by a company called J2 Communications in 1992, which would let other movie companies and studios use the National Lampoon title and logo for their comedy movies for a fee, despite pretty much having nothing to do with the National Lampoon brand. And Loaded Weapon 1 was actually the first movie to do this. And during the 90s, there were several theatrical and made-for-TV movies which used the National Lampoon's logo, where in actual fact the National Lampoon name was simply leased out by J2 Communications. I guess it was felt that if you can somehow connect your movie to other popular movies like Animal House and Vacation, then it would really help to give your movie some clout. Number 8, Bruce Willis helping out his brother. So, you think that Bruce Willis played the legendary John McClane 5 times, right? Well, think again. He's actually played the character 6 times, as Willis shows up in character as John McClane for a brief cameo in Loaded Weapon 1. Okay, he's never named, but he's wearing the iconic white vest, so it's McClane, right? Right? I mean, yeah, look, come on, he's totally John McClane. Although I guess you could argue that technically Willis in Loaded Weapon 1 is a hybrid of McClane and Riggs from Lethal Weapon, as the character has a beach caravan home just like Riggs in that movie. But regardless, why did Willis, who was a big-time Hollywood actor at that time, feature in a tiny cameo in Loaded Weapon 1? Well, simply put, to help out his brother David Willis, who was the co-producer of Loaded Weapon 1. The irony is, despite being a spoof of the action movie genre, David Willis would go on to co-produce Die Hard with a Vengeance 2 years later, as well as A Good Day to Die Hard, but, you know, never mind, no one's perfect. He's actually been involved in quite a few of his brother Bruce's movies, including Hudson Hawk and Hostage. And of course, Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson both star in Loaded Weapon 1, and would reunite the following year for Pulp Fiction, and then a year after that with Die Hard with a Vengeance. Number 7, from one cop comedy franchise to another. So, we've learned that Loaded Weapon 1 is a National Lampoon's movie in brand name only, distributed by New Line Cinema and co-produced by Bruce Willis's brother. But who was the director of this comedy spoof movie? Well, the director was writer and producer and sometimes director Gene Quintano, whom had written several movies, such as the 2 Cannon-produced Alan Quatermain films from the 80s. But the most interesting aspect of Quintano's resume is his ties to another police comedy series, that being the Police Academy films, as Quintano was the scriptwriter for Police Academy 3, Back in Training, and Police Academy 4, Citizens on Patrol. So it's just interesting having that connection between Loaded Weapon 1 and Police Academy. In addition to Loaded Weapon 1, this is only one of 3 theatrical movies that Quintano would direct. The others were Honeymoon Academy, never heard of it, and Why Me, also never heard of it. I hate to go off topic here, but looking at this poster, I can't help but wonder, is it just me or has Christopher Lambert and Christopher Lloyd swapped hairdos? Number 6, French title change. Just a few episodes ago, I was talking about movies having alternative titles, particularly in other parts of the world. Well, it seems that even Loaded Weapon 1 couldn't avoid this intriguing phenomenon, as for French-speaking audiences, the title was changed to Fatal Alarm. Now, while doing research for this episode, I thought to myself, why Fatal Alarm? Why not just call the movie Loaded Weapon? But then I remembered that the title Loaded Weapon is a cheeky reference to Lethal Weapon, and so I put on my clever investigation hat and looked into the French release of Lethal Weapon and discovered that both the French posters for Loaded Weapon and Lethal Weapon have the word fatal in the title. So I'm not sure if that has something to do with it. I guess it doesn't help that I don't speak French. But either way, for French-speaking viewers, Loaded Weapon 1 became Fatal Alarm 1. Number 5, Loaded Weapon 1 wasn't the only body action spoof of 1993. Yes, Loaded Weapon 1 may have fired shots at the action movie tropes of the late 80s and early 90s, particularly the buddy cop movies. However, in the glorious year of 1993, there was another movie which also made fun of that genre, with the more mainstream Last Action Hero. The biggest difference is Last Action Hero features the big guy himself, the king of the late 80s and early 90s action movies, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Last Action Hero also has several people who actually worked on those action movies also work on that movie, such as director John McTiernan, who also directed Die Hard, with music composed by Michael Kamen, who scored both Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, with Last Action Hero being a very glossy film and a high quality spoof movie. And just like Loaded Weapon 1, it makes fun of the cliches of the genre, such as the tropes of having 2 unlikely people team up in an over-the-top action-adventure, along with an evil villain played by a British guy. Heck, both movies even feature the angry captain trope, who screams and shouts all the time. And in both films, the part was played by actor Frank McRae. I mean, what are the odds? And if all that wasn't enough, both movies feature actor F. Murray Abraham in a small but humorous role. Okay, seriously, what's going on here? Are these 2 movies cousins or what? Last Action Hero did outperform Loaded Weapon 1, by a lot, but it was still considered as not doing as good as expected. But that's down to poor reviews and being released at the same time as Jurassic Park. But regardless, which one do you guys think was the better cop spoof movie? Loaded Weapon 1 or Last Action Hero? Number 4, tearing the critics a new one. Let's face it, Loaded Weapon 1 was never going to be a movie that the critics were going to like. So I guess the powers that be behind Loaded Weapon 1 thought that they would get in first and tear the critics a new one before the critics could have time to inevitably rip into Loaded Weapon 1. Where the posters and cover artwork for several home media releases featured comical quotes from so-called critics, with one fake review saying, "shorter than Dances with Wolves," making a joke about that movie's length, with the quote being credited by a really important critic. Then another quote saying, "the movie's even funnier than the video cover," once again quoted by a really important critic. Other quotes include, "on a scale of 1 to 10, more than a movie, less than 2 hours, never before had a movie had this title," a quote by the director's mum and dad, and my favourite quote is, "convenient parking." Yeah, the movie is so bad, but damn it, the parking at the local movie theatre was actually okay. I seriously love it. I can't help but feel like the movie quotes seem to reflect the perception that critics are up their own asses and only like big epic movies that are long in duration. And I just want to say, the perception of critics, not my own personal opinion. I mean, to a degree, I'm kind of one myself. But it's like they knew that the critics would rip the movie apart, so Loaded Weapon 1 did it first and more or less said, "come at me." Number 3, the Japanese movie poster is pretty epic. Speaking of posters and covers, we then cut to the Japanese movie poster for Loaded Weapon 1, which is actually pretty damn awesome, I don't mind saying. The illustrated poster is a homage, or piss take, on the Lethal Weapon 3 movie poster, where we have Emilio Estevez and Samuel L. Jackson in the Riggs and Murtaugh roles, naturally, where Charlie Sheen is a stand-in for Leo Getz. I guess because Sheen briefly appears in the movie. And equally baffling, we also have Bruce Willis as John McClane on the poster, drinking a can of, past? But regardless, I really kind of love this poster. And even though the fact that it's making fun of Lethal Weapon is more obvious in this poster, it's always fun seeing another country's interpretation of movies. Number 2, sequel scrapped. Despite the fact that Loaded Weapon 1 has a 1 in its title, which is making fun of the fact that a lot of these action movies go on to have many sequels, there supposedly was a deal set in motion for a Loaded Weapon 2. And presumably from there, if successful, there may have been more sequels, with Loaded Weapon becoming its own franchise, the very thing it was actually mocking. According to IMDb, which let's face it is not the most reliable source of information as anyone can literally write anything, there was already a teaser poster put together, which had the tagline, "Oh come on, you knew it was coming." Now, I haven't been able to find this so-called poster, so who knows? I'm not saying it does or doesn't exist, just take the information with a pinch of salt and sprinkle it on some funny fries. The sequel didn't happen due to the poor reception of Loaded Weapon 1. Instead, the next movie to go under the National Lampoon's brand was Senior Trip. And likewise with New Line Cinema, they would turn to Jim Carrey to bring in the cinematic LOLs, as the following year, New Line Cinema would release The Mask and Dumb and Dumber. But the fact that Loaded Weapon 1 has no sequels actually makes its title even funnier. It actually helps with that gag of having a 1 in the title. Number 1, and of course the critics hated it. So yeah, come on, you all knew it was coming, we had to get there sooner or later, but it goes without saying that the critics did not like Loaded Weapon 1. Now, to be fair, Roger Ebert, who I know is every YouTuber's go-to guy when it comes to talking about critics, actually did have some valid points, as he suggested that it's meant to be a spoof movie of the action police film genre, where the Lethal Weapon movies already were somewhat spoofs. Now, yeah, the Lethal Weapon movies did more and more increasingly become comedies with each sequel, but they were still serious movies set in a grounded, realistic universe. But there was still the odd tongue-in-cheek moment where Lethal Weapon itself did actually poke fun at the genre. But regardless, Loaded Weapon 1 was released in February 1993 and made back $28 million on an $8 million budget, so it did make a small profit. but it was still lower than expected, especially when you take into account the previous National Lampoon's movie, Christmas Vacation, brought in over $73 million. But regardless, I would still recommend Loaded Weapon 1, and to just get sucked in and swept away with its stupid humour, which is honestly really addictive. You know you shouldn't laugh at some of the jokes, as you know they are dumb, and yet they are just so hilarious for even existing in the first place. Bless this movie. So if you're a fan of spoof movies, then Loaded Weapon 1 is a must. Something you have to watch, especially in a time when the spoof genre isn't really so mainstream. This movie deserves way more recognition. Loaded Weapon 1 may be a silly movie, but that in no way stops it from being a fun, hilarious romp. So if you're into the humour of movies like Airplane and The Naked Gun and Hot Shots, then Loaded 1 is right up your alley. It's very much a relic of early 90s pop culture in general. You know, a time of Silence of the Lambs and Basic Instinct references. I would go as far as to say that this movie could only exist in the faraway world of 1993. So check it out for a good time and good laughs. Anyway, I'm Minty. And remember, life is very short, there's no time for fussing and fighting, my friend. See ya!